Jeff from Two Hacks Garage. Well, I'm back at Jimmy's, and as you guys have seen, we've got a whole bunch of engine assembly stuff going on currently. One of them is a 388 cubic inch small block Chevy that I'm building for my friend Todd. And another one is this engine you see here. This is a 1970 LT1 350. This is getting a real basic, if you want to call it, freshening up. Behind me here, probably can't see it, but there's another small block that Jimmy's been working on today. We're going to go pretty in depth with that 388 cubic inch small block Chevy since everything is new. But this engine, as you saw in the last video, we went ahead and pulled it out of the hot tank, did a final cleaning, wiped it down to make sure it doesn't flash rust, and we installed the cam bearings. So the next step that we like to do is actually install the freeze plugs. And the kit that I'm using today is a Mellings expansion plug kit. It's got all the different brass freeze plugs in there, all the different taps and all that go in here, all the little plugs and all that. But today, this video is just going to show you kind of the next step of our engine building series, which is installing these freeze plugs. What we like to do is get those installed, and after that, we can go ahead and paint it. If you can see on here, it is a little bit oily. That is from us oiling stuff down so it doesn't rust. That will all get cleaned before painted. But today what we really do want to show you is how to install freeze plugs. And our method is pretty basic. Literally just purchased this Mellings kit. It was about $20. Made in the USA, very quality product. So kind of what you need here is a good little flashlight. We use to seal it up. It's a Permatex Aviation Form-A-Gasket sealant liquid. The reason why we're using this, it does create a nice tight bond around the actual freeze plug in the block, and it also is resistant to heat and other liquids. We do this now with the block, so it gives this quite a bit of time to actually form up, harden, and that way when we go to paint it, everything's good to go with this. The other thing you're going to need is a nice shillelagh hammer. This is just kind of like a 2 or 3 pound mini sledge. And there's a couple ways you can do it. I do have a driver set that works pretty well with this. I don't know if the ends on it are the size of these freeze plugs, sorry. Sometimes you can get away with using a socket. You got to remember, a lot of times you're doing this in your garage and you just got to use what you have. So what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to show you the process on installing these freeze plugs. See you in a few. All right, kind of first thing first, what we're going to do here is we're going to actually size our actual freeze plugs to the actual holes it's going to need. They are marked on these. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a couple of these out of the package and kind of show you what I'm talking about here. If you actually look inside of the freeze plug, they are actually marked for what size hole they are. There's multiple sizes on here. That one's 1 5/8. There's quite a few 1 5/8. And, you know, once you start lining these up, you'll kind of see where they go because there's only one for each hole. So as you can see, these here actually do fit nicely in those holes. They're 1 5/8. And we do have ones for like the back and all that. Now, and a lot of times what we do, since if you look at the engine block, the back of it is kind of being blocked. So once this is done, we actually go back and do the last couple once we're done. This kit also does come with all the little plug holes for the oil galleys and all that, and we'll get those installed too. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is show you how to put in these freeze plugs. So the first thing I'm going to do is look for an actual one of my driver tools to see if it's going to fit this 1 5/8 freeze plug. And if you look here, I have different driver ends for this. It's actually for like bearing races and all that, but it does work well for this. You want it to fit nice and snug in there, but not overly too snug, just enough to drive it. So that one doesn't feel too bad. We can probably get it in there with that, but if you can see here, this outer edge isn't going to, you know, sink down in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start test fitting these a little bit to make sure we have proper fitment. I will see you in a few. All right, so I got the right tool for this now, and want to show you something on the other driver that I was sizing up for it, and kind of the importance of doing that. So when I showed you this, see how that is tapered in there, and it does have a fit? Well, looking at it and kind of looking at it, from the angle of that being pushed in and this expanding out, that taper you don't want in there. It's not actually going to go in there. So that is not going to work. So you do have to pay attention to what kind of driver you're going in there. Like I said, sockets in a lot of cases do work too if you ain't got nothing else. So digging through some of Jimmy's stuff, he had another driver set, and if you look here, it's perfect. It goes in there, allows for a little bit of expansion, and if you look, it's going to hit that edge. It's going to have a positive drive on that. So what we're going to do, the first thing first on this, and mind you how we're doing this, so if you look here, hit that with a hammer on the end. But one of the first things that we're going to do is put a little bit of the stuff, the aviation gasket maker on here.
Beat the snot out of it.
Yep, and then you beat the snot out of it on there. So I am just going to take, once I get this thing off there.
Let's see. These things are coming in at 18.
So I am
Due to the heat, I think I'm going to take them up to 25.
going to put just a little bit of that stuff around the outside.
We weren't close to 25.
A general amount.
We weren't 25 up on your rings, were we?
No. Jimmy's in the background right now. He's doing something a whole lot more fun than what I'm doing. He is actually sizing up some piston rings, which we will be going over at some point. So if you look here, I got that gasket sealer on there. It's the aviation fluid, sealant. So what you're going to do, you're going to take that and you're going to put that right in there like that. You're going to take your driver. See if I can do everything at once here. I do have a flashlight on here just so it helps out visually see just a little bit. You're going to put that in there and you're going to line it up. Okay? And you're going to sit there and you're going to pound on it. You don't have to go super crazy or hard. You just want to make sure it goes in nice and even. And you don't want to drive it all the way through because then you have a freeze plug stuck in the engine block, and those can be a real pain in the butt to take out. So if you look here, I've got it pretty flush in there. I'm going to go a little bit more, but not much. I'm going to show you one more on this from a different angle. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to wipe that clean on there and kind of get a close-up shot to kind of show you what we did there. All right, so if you take a look, that excess fluid did get pushed out. So what you're going to do is you're just going to wipe most of that off. It will dry up pretty nice, but as you can see here, what I was able to do is I got that nice and flush to the actual block here. So that is recessed down in there, nice and tight. And that aviation gasket maker, what that does is it creates a nice seal between the actual freeze expansion plug and the block, seals it up. It's good for heat and other fluids, so you're good to go on that. So we're going to get on to the next one here in a second from a different angle. See you in a minute. All right, we're going to go on to the next one here. And Jimmy just made a really good point. So I'm actually using these copper plugs, and they do make steel ones. The nice part, there's a couple nice parts about using these. This copper plug here. The nice part about it is it does expand a little quicker, which makes it easier to drive in the hole. But at the same time, too, knowing that this isn't going to be a cold weather engine and all that, but if it was to say, and it did freeze, these plugs, since they are technically a softer material and can expand easier, if things were to freeze, these will actually pop out much easier than a steel plug. So what we're going to do is we're going to show the same process here from a different angle, and you can kind of see how we got that going on.
And the people who don't believe in antifreeze, they will never rot out like steel ones will.
Yeah, so that's another good point too. Some, everyone runs the 50/50 or whatever, but if this was a race engine and just straight water and it was to sit in the winter and actually freeze and thaw, freeze and thaw, or not even freeze, what can happen with the steel ones is they can actually rot, create a bunch of corrosion in here and all that. These will not. And the whole kit, by the way, was only like $20. It's a Mellings Made in the USA kit, so you got to be able to appreciate that. So I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to take this here, and I am just going around it, getting a nice layer, generally spread that on there. You don't have to go crazy with it, just get it coated because it's kind of thick and gooey. All right, now that I got that coated like that, I'm going to stick it in the hole, kind of straighten it out a little bit, wipe my hands off. It is a little messy of a job, takes a little bit of time to do them all, but it ain't bad. Now when you watch this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the driver tool itself. Like I said, you can actually use a socket on this, but I'm actually using an old bearing driver and it's been machined down on the end. I'm going to put it right in there inside, and I'm going to get it as straight as possible so it stays and drives in even. And then you're just going to tap it, medium pressure. You don't have to go crazy. This ain't John Henry putting down a railroad. And just like cam bearings, if you want to stop, you can stop and check it too. It's not going to hurt anything. Okay, let's give it a check. So you see there, it's not all the way in. You can see that ridge right there isn't kind of flushed in there with the block. You want to go a little bit further in, but like I said, you don't want to go too far because then you got problems. And you do want to drive them evenly. Oh, I need to go a little bit more. There we go. And maybe a little bit more on the There we go. Nice, good last solid whack there. And we look to be pretty good. Now, mind you, when doing these, I am going to show you something here that is important when choosing your driver tool. Like I said, you can use pretty much anything that's solid, but you want to make sure whatever you're using here doesn't protrude past the actual freeze plug and hitting the block. Because then all you're going to do is when you're trying to drive this in, all you're going to do is sit there and hit the block and you're not going to be able to drive it in. So all you want to do, like I said, that's pretty much flush. Same with this one. It's got a nice seal because that fluid had pushed out. So you know what? Those two are done. It's going to throw it on time lapse, do the rest of them. See you in a few. All right, so the 4 freeze plugs that are on the sides of the engine blocks, they are done. But since I have the engine block kind of upside down, on these small block Chevys and a lot of engines you see here, it's got a threaded hole here, and there's also one on the other side. That's an actual plug. Sometimes they're square and all that, but the ones that you usually get with a kit come in handy. It's an Allen there. So what happens is those actually thread in here, and that's your water passage. So that's also a drain for that when you're doing your cleaning and all that. But to make this really seal correctly, Jimmy and I use like a PTFE, not like the tape, but we actually use something here that we call, well, it's called True Blue pipe thread sealant, and it's vibration resistant. It's also good for heat, different fluids, but it contains PTFE. So what I do here, so if I can try to get this in video, you don't need a whole lot of this, actually, hardly any, because it will expand within the threads. I usually just take this here, and I'll actually just wipe it on the actual plug like that, and then just squeeze it in with my fingers like this all the way around, and now you have a nice layer of that sealant there. So, and if you miss any spots, it will push itself through. So basically what you do is you go ahead and start it threaded, and you don't want to cross thread that one there. It's kind of important. And then you find the correct bit for that, which I will get out now. I do like this kit from Mellings. It does have pretty much everything you need. And overall, like I said, it's a good, in my opinion, well, probably should be everybody's opinion, but it's made in the USA. It's quality parts, and you can't beat that. Yep, it's keeping Americans employed, and quality of the product's better. So it's a win-win for everybody. So this is a quarter. So I'm going to do, I am just going to run that down into the block. Now, mind you, Jimmy and I, on all these engines that we do, before it even gets hot tanked, we go ahead and we chase all the threads. We get all the rust, grime, gunk out of there. Part of the reason being, it makes assembly a lot better. But when you're doing other items like mains and all that, you want to make sure those are all completely cleaned out to get proper torque specs. But I really doubt there's a torque spec on this, so we're just going to drive it in there until it's nice and tight and kind of flush with the block. You can see the excess. Oh, it ain't going to go all the way down in there. It's about close.
When you run the tap through them,
There you go.
bolt tap, and then you put it in the hot tank, it makes them degrease easier.
Yeah, that's true. Like,
You be sure to get all the garbage out of the thread.
yeah, Jimmy just made a good point. You know, part of getting all this, when we chase it before we hot tank it, gets all that gunk, makes the cleaning process with the hot tank that much easier. So if you see here, there's another one on this side over here, right there. And I'm going to do the same thing. This isn't rocket science. It does take a little bit of time, and you just need to really kind of just pay attention. Basically, you just don't want to cross thread anything with these, and with your freeze plugs, you just want to pay attention so you're not hammering them down past the engine block itself. You can see it's still a little bit dirty, but you know it's already been hot tank cleaned off. That's just residue from us doing other work. This will get cleaned off again before we paint it and all that. A lot of that's just junk from us working on stuff. That's kind of one of the other things is too when doing this is, you know, between each step and all that, you do clean it, especially when you get to the point of like final assembly with bearings and all that fun jazz. So once again, just take a little bit of that True Blue with the PTFE in it. And as you guys saw, the excess did kind of make its way up to the top and squish out. Start it by hand. And I'm just going to say this now, and I know Jimmy's the same way. I like using hand tools. I don't like using electric tools for a lot of this stuff. Kind of want to feel it, feel what's going on. There we go. And that's how you do it. Those plugs are filled. And now we're going to move on to the front engine.
Biggest reason I like hand tools,
Yeah, Jimmy?
when you're tightening up stuff like that after a few years of doing it, or a few of them, whatever you're doing, or if it's repetitious work, you get the feel of things.
Yeah.
Power tools, you can strip thread, and it don't care.
Yep.
But if you feel something different when you're working on it with hand tools, then you know something's wrong.
Yep.
Then you don't tighten it any tighter.
All right, so now we're on to the front of the engine. And one thing I did want to show you guys here, so it's got the two freeze plug, holes for two the freeze plug expansion, sorry. Can't get that out of my mouth, but they're the same size as the ones that are on the side of the blocks here. So we'll do those two the same way. But for the oil galley that you see here, these three holes, that helps feed the cam, lifters, and all that stuff, and it goes to the back of the block. Well, from the factory, the back of the block has those three holes that are actually tapped for these same plugs. A lot of times what happens is once you take these out, you will run a tap through these and tap them for these. But in this case, we're going to show you how to do it the factory way. And this kit does come with these really itty bitty small little expansion plugs here. There's a way that we do like to do these so they do stay in there. They don't want to come out and they don't want to leak. So first thing first, what we're going to do is we're going to get these in real quick, and then we'll show you how to do that. But since I've already showed you how to do this, I'm literally just going to throw it on time lapse to drive these two in. See you in a few. All right, so I got the freeze plugs in the front, clean stuff up. They're flush, they're nice, they're not going to leak. So what we're going to do is the factory way of putting in the oil galley plugs instead of tapping these. We'll show you how to do that on another build. But for this one, we're literally going to go the factory way. So what Jimmy is using is a punch that is, just a little bit smaller than that plug there. And Jimmy, was that red Loctite?
Yes, it was.
And he put some red Loctite on that, and that's going to hold it in. So I'm going to hold this engine block from moving.
Now the good news is you get started. Then here's the problem. It always rolls metal. So you drive this in a little further, and you can usually flake the metal off, but make sure you get it out of the block.
So you see there how it rolls that edge, and that's due to the manufacturing on this. So if you got to clean it up, you can probably take like what, Jimmy, like maybe a little chisel or an edge and clean that off.
Yes, try not to blow it off. The reason being, you don't want to spread it out through the engine.
So you see there,
Piece hanging there.
want to wipe that Loctite off of there.
Wad that up in a little ball and stuff it in there.
In there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or I'll get a Q-tip. I'll tell you what, I'll get a Q-tip. That works better.
So what you want to do is see if I can get a better angle at this here. But if you look, in that hole right there, it's the same theory, except different sealant. On the freeze plugs, we use aviation sealant. On this, you use a Loctite red. And Jimmy's just going to go in there with that Q-tip, and he's going to make sure there's no junk and garbage in there. And mind you, before we do a final assembly and everything, we'll make sure they're all clean. But if you look here, the actual plug itself is recessed in there like it's supposed to be.
If you notice, I knocked it just a hair below the surface to break that flashing off that kind of rolled around.
So we'll do these front two and go from there. Which size was that one, Jimmy?
I got them out there in here.
Okay.
They're half. I got them.
So that's how you do this. We'll watch Jimmy do these last two. What I'm going to do is I'm going to clip the microphone on Jimmy's hat.
Oh, yippee.
And we'll get a
I promise to be good and not say anything bad.
we'll get a close up on here. Now he's using a hammer and an actual just flat edge punch. So the flat edge punch it goes in there, and I'll back up a little bit and get part of this here. And you're just going to tap the back. I'm going to hold the engine block. If you watch that, it's going to go in there. It's going to keep going. See how it rolled that metal? That's that's like when they make
Ooh,
these.
big chunk right there.
It just bevels that off. It's basically a little bit softer than the block. So of course it's going to have a little bit of metal edging. And I'm going to wipe this down.
Got chunk right there.
A
Got
little
it.
bit of metal there. Go in there and clean that up.
Got to go in any further?
No, that's actually
Is it below the surface of the
that's
block?
below the surface.
Okay.
See?
I'm going to tap it just a hair more, and the reason being, we're going to come back and center punch it to stake it in place.
There we go.
So it doesn't blow back out.
Okay.
Not that the oil pressure be that much, but
Mind you, see all this little crap? Like I said before, everything does get cleaned in between steps. The towel there. So, Jimmy, explain. Well, we'll get there with the center punch.
I never did tell you, but years ago when I first started this, I had some guy that didn't know. Had to give him credit. At least he asked, but he was inquisitive. It's everything I did to keep from laughing at him, but he wanted to know by putting a high pressure oil spring in it, wouldn't that wash the bearings out of the engine? Like, no, it's not like a pump. I mean, not like a well pump or something. You're not gonna blow the bearings out of the engine.
A little bit more. See it go in there. Oh, you see that little metal flake come off? That'll happen. Don't be concerned about
A little
that.
bit more. There we go.
All right, so get that flake out. I'm gonna wipe the red stuff off. The red Loctite, all that does, it's that metal to metal in there. It makes a nice tight bond like everything else.
Yeah, there wasn't anything in the inside of it. They're all clean?
Yep.
Okay, I'll go get a steak punch.
So the next step of these front ones here is the steak punch. Now, I'll have Jimmy explain to you as he does that what it is. See you in a minute. So if you look here, this is a steak punch, and if you look on that tip, you see how it's ground around there, and it goes to that kind of like an oblong point. So this tool here is used to actually keep this plug in there. Even though we have Loctite, but you'll see what Jimmy's going to do. You can see it's already been done before, but watch what Jimmy does here. He's going to take it on that edge of that metal.
Oh boy, I'll do it over here.
And he's tapping on that. And what that's doing,
It's moving the punch.
you see how it's
Towards
moving
the
a little
hole.
bit of that iron towards that hole. It's basically making like a little bit of a ridge, and that helps hold that plug in there. And the reason that's important, if something was to ever happen and one of these plugs comes loose, well, guess what happens? That little bit of movement on a little bit of the iron, like I said, you're not going to go real hard, is going to hold that into place. I probably got the light in Jimmy's way.
Yes, you do. There you go.
Filming and working is fun, but sometimes it can be a pain in the butt of trying to,
Especially when you hit the flashlight with a hammer.
yeah. So I'm just going to keep rotating this out of the way.
Kind of like me, that my nickname is the cell phone killer. I get mad at them and break them.
Yep.
I hate them.
So he's just stake punching all those around there. And yeah, just a little bit.
There we go.
Old machinist trick, old engine builder trick. Seen a few. All right, so that video, a little bit longer than usual, but that is the process of installing freeze plugs, your oil galley plugs, and also a little bit of a tutorial on putting in the thread-in plugs for the water jackets and all that. So really what's all left on this one is, on the back of the block, it's the same thing that we got going on here. It's got two plugs like this, same process. It's got the oil galley holes, but those are thread-in, and it came with the same thread-in plugs as the side of the block. That's the same process. But on the cam plug in the back, it is a bigger one here, and instead of using the aviation sealant, you're actually going to use silicone. When we go to finish this engine, we'll get to that point. But I hope you guys learned something with this. You know, like I said, it's easy. It's not rocket science. But at the same time, you got to take your time, have the right tools, and most of all, just be patient with it. So with that, guys, we're going to have another tutorial video coming up soon. Have a good one.